It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars show, and a little bit more this week. I will share with you my thoughts of the new film that just opened up, Civil War. We'll get caught up on all things Star Wars, The Bad Batch, new details regarding the Rise of Skywalker from some supplemental material. Daisy Ridley talking about the script for her new post The Rise of Skywalker film and returning as Rey. Also, we'll dive into some of your emails this week, too. If you want to support My Nerd World, head on over to mynerdworld.net. Check out the science fiction space opera series EMBARK, 7 books in all in the series, available now in ebook, hardcover, or paperback, and audiobook. I'll share with you more details later on in the show. Let's get to it.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together.
You know, I've said this so many times before, but whenever I hear these edits of the trailers,
Confronting fear.
because I have 2 different versions I use for the show, they do what trailers are supposed to do. They get me excited to go back and watch Star Wars. And this one is certainly no exception at all. To a movie that I genuinely love. But that's what it's supposed to do, right?
My Nerd World.
Welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out another episode. And as I mentioned, if you want to support My Nerd World, I hope that you'll take the opportunity to go and pick up your preferred version of my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. The first book in the series, by the way, really is a mashup of a post-apocalyptic adventure combined with a space opera, and the rest of the series turns into a big epic space opera. I was reminded of that a bit when I was watching Civil War over the weekend, and actually have gone back and tailored some of the advertising for my science fiction novel to fit that a little bit better. So I've been off for a little over a week now. I was traveling last week to Savannah, Georgia, and was going to go and do a podcast from my hotel, but I couldn't make the program work for Spreaker, which I use on my laptop, so I had to wait. And then this week I got tied up a bit, but I'm glad that I did, because I wanted to share with you a few items that I needed to wait on this week before I had a chance to dive into it. We will get into Star Wars, but I want to start off giving you my thoughts, spoiler-free, about the movie Civil War, directed by Alex Garland, of whom I'm kind of a fan. Now, he hasn't done a lot. He wrote 28 Days Later, the horror zombie movie going back to, I think, the late 90s, early 2000s. One of my favorite zombie movies ever. Did some work on the remake of Dread, which I quite enjoy, but his film Ex Machina, I'm a huge fan of Ex Machina, and it's weird, but Annihilation is a really good film as well. Alex Garland is a very thoughtful director. He's more of an art house director, and while Civil War is not necessarily an action movie, it is more of an art house character-driven story. There is action in it. It is incredibly tense, and in my opinion, apolitical. So let's back up just a little bit. The trailer dropped for Civil War several months back, and it shows a country, the United States of America, in the midst of a civil war, with a president that was now serving a third term. You had factions that had formed, and you had alliances that seemed unlikely, California and Texas, for example. When the trailer dropped earlier this year, there was a lot of controversy surrounding it. And whether or not it was responsible to release a film like this with this subject matter in the middle of an election year, with so much bias in our media, would this movie be able to tell an apolitical story, or would it have an agenda? And there was a lot of unnecessary criticism and freaking out before the movie even hit the screens. Now, this certainly benefited Civil War. I haven't seen the box office numbers yet, but it's what everybody is talking about at the moment in pop culture. A lot of individuals had gone and analyzed the trailer that showed a map of the country divided up, trying to draw conclusions from that. It's not a surprise that Alex Garland has not overtly, but when asked, I mean, he is a liberal director. I don't think there's any doubt about that. So I was very curious if he was going to be able to make a film about a country in the middle of a civil war without making it too message heavy. And listen, the movie met my expectations. The most controversial aspect of the film isn't that it's political at all, it's how apolitical it is. If anybody attempts to go, well, let me back up. People have attempted to go and say that this movie leans, left politically. Anybody doing that, in my opinion, it's their perception that's doing that. The movie does not lay that out for you. The president is a 3-term president, but you have no, and these are not spoilers. These are all pretty much given, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers in the film. The president is a 3-term president, but you have no idea why he's a 3-term president. He is called a fascist, but you don't really know why he's called a fascist. This was also released before the film. He's disbanded the FBI, but you don't know why he's disbanded the FBI. Now, there are those that are making comparisons saying this is an avatar to Trump, and that might be the case, even though there isn't anything in the film to directly go and look at this guy, apart from being an older white guy played by Nick Offerman, to say that he's, that he is Trump, and doesn't act that way in the film. You have multiple factions in the Civil War in the country, but you have no idea which way their political leanings are. There's a group called the Western Front, which is the major the major army that's broken away from the United States that's marching on Washington to go get the president. So you can assume the Western Front, which is made up of California and Texas, is against whatever is happening in D.C. and what the president has done, but we don't know how the country devolved into a civil war. It starts with the country already at war. And you don't know, as you see the different factions fighting in the film, you have no idea why they're fighting. Which makes it a very interesting watch, because its ambiguity allows the viewer to potentially go and put their own idea as to what they're fighting over in the film. There are some visual cues to existing organizations. There is a mention of an Antifa massacre. The movie is supposed to take place 20 years from now. But in the mention of an Antifa massacre in Portland, you don't know whether or not it was Antifa that was massacred or Antifa went and massacred somebody else. There's another moment in the film, and this was shown in the trailer, where there's 2 soldiers out in the countryside, and one of them is down in the sniper position. And if you look closely at him, his hair is multicolored in pastels. His fingernails are painted in pastels, and the other soldier that's there also has his hair colored that way. But you have no idea what faction they belong to and why that is. Now, you could go and take that and apply it to political visual cues in modern society, but again, they do not spell any of that out. The story is about a small group of journalists who are documenting this civil war, knowing that a faction is heading towards D.C. to potentially go and confront the president and what forces he has left in D.C. They decide that they want to tell this story and get into D.C. before this all goes down. Kirsten Dunst plays the lead character. You have Kaylee Spaney, a new actress in her 20s. She's an aspiring photojournalist who ends up tagging along. Kirsten Dunst's character, Lee, has there's a man, an actor who joins her in the group, And you can kind of get the sense that he's aligned with one of these factions potentially, but it's not made abundantly clear. And then there's an older journalist that also tags along with them on these journeys. The story is really about their journeys. It's a road film. Feels kind of like a zombie movie with the way that they're living in sort of a post-apocalyptic America. One of the only complaints that I have about the film is there are moments where they're driving and they don't see anybody and there's no cars on the road. And they'll be driving along a freeway littered with burned-out cars, but there's no explanation as to where everybody went. I have questions like that. There's another moment in the film where they arrive inside an abandoned, completely covered in graffiti football field, a stadium at a high school, conceivably, with a whole bunch of people living there and with sort of FEMA-esque services they're taking advantage of, with, again, no explanation as to why they've been driven from your homes. But it's okay relative to the film because, again, the ambiguity of it and the lack of spelling everything out still completely works. You understand what's happening. And it follows these individuals and their journeys as they come across various members of these factions in the country. It is incredibly well directed. There are some visually stunning moments in the film. The action is spot on when it occurs. There's not a lot of it, but it is a rather brutal film. There's several needle drops, music that's used prominently in the movie, and it's used very, very specifically and very carefully. As I mentioned earlier, Alex Garland is a very careful and thoughtful director. He did a fantastic job of weaving in the music appropriately among these spectacular visuals, and it leaves you with a lot of questions at the end of the film, more towards journalism. And there are certainly some messages you could take away about modern journalism in this film, but it really is more about that aspect of it. And again, Alex Garland created a film that's incredibly compelling. My wife and I really haven't been able to stop talking about it since we went and saw it on Thursday, and we actually want to go and see it again. And like I mentioned, anyone saying that this movie leans left or right, they're reaching. There are certainly moments in the film where you could easily go and say, so that person is kind of analogous of far right-wing individuals, right? But they're not portrayed as evil, and it's not like those types of people also don't exist in the world. There's another group that you could see as an avatar for this radical libertarian group, the Boogaloo Boys, if you've heard of them in the media. But you don't know the motivation and the justification for their actions. Their actions look atrocious, but you also have no idea what brought them to that place and whether or not in their minds they felt justified. And the same thing that I was mentioning earlier relating to, well, why is he a 3-term president? What happened? It's left up to the viewer. At the end of the film, it's very, very intense. A lot of action at the end of the film, and you kind of walk away more not asking about where things are going to go in the country, and this happening in the country. I don't see a civil war to this level even being possible in modern society, even though this was an interesting depiction of it. It was about ambition. This young, up-and-coming journalist, the decisions that she makes, what she learns on the way, and the decisions the other individuals have made, especially Kirsten Dunst's character, Lee, who had been doing war journalism for many years, and clearly it had taken its toll. The movie takes its time, but in a good way. And again, the initial freak out from the film was really unwarranted, in my opinion. It's a really good movie. I really, really enjoyed it. I watched an interview with Alex Garland, and I feel like he didn't do himself any favors because he mentioned how if you pay close attention, you can kind of get the idea of where his head was at politically, but I think it's a mistake to approach it that way. I think it's better just to watch these scenes play out from an angle of you don't really know who's fighting who and for what reason, and you don't need to know. That's not what the important part of the film is about. Overall, I'd end up giving the film probably an 8 out of 10. It's one that I'll definitely want to own, and will be heading out to the theater to see again sometime in the future before it leaves the theater.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
As always, I'd love to hear from you. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Let's dive into some Star Wars news and get caught up with a bit of the Bad Batch. I've been enjoying the Bad Batch. I'll, repeat myself from previous podcasts. It's a really fun show to watch. Always great to watch new Star Wars. It is very episodic in its nature. Expectations that this would be a more serialized season. It is a little bit more serialized than in seasons past, but at the same time, we are getting these very episodic adventures of the week still, and we have a few episodes left. I really enjoyed the double episodes that we received last week, including that first one where they spent almost all of their time away from the Bad Batch and Omega, and spent all their time on Tantus dealing with the Force-sensitive children. I thought the music in that episode was spectacular, and clearly they gave us 2 episodes because that was more of a slow, that was a slower episode, and to have that be the only one we got that week, I think would have left some people a little bit disappointed, so they coupled it with the episode where Omega, spoiler alert, ends up turning herself in. But that was a really exciting episode as well. I want to pull a few details from Star Wars Newsnet, Miguel Fernandez, talking about this week's episode, Juggernaut. From the very beginning, but especially this last season, the most interesting aspect of the Bad Batch has been its expansion of Star Wars mythology, and I totally agree. Season 3 introduced intriguing, but perhaps late in the game ideas of Omega being Force-sensitive. I certainly don't think that's the case now. Or at least having a higher M count. That's what I think is going on. She simply has a higher M count, but has not tapped into it to be Force-sensitive. It is by far the biggest exploration of midichlorians as a concept we've ever had since The Phantom Menace. Essentially name-dropped it to be able to use it as a plot device, and then in its shorter version of M count and more recent Lucasfilm content. That was introduced in The Mandalorian, but really not used all that much. Juggernaut, the latest episode in the series, picks up where the last one left off. Omega is now on Tantus. The rest of the crew is desperately looking for her. The young clone probably didn't expect her return to the scientific base to be a walk through the park, but she's about to face a much harder reality than she anticipated. The bulk of the episode, however, is centered around Wrecker, Crosshair, and Hunter trying to find the mysterious location. Omega's subplot, in my opinion, is way more interesting, and Miguel Fernandez says as much. It presents something new. There are only so many ways the Bad Batch can shoot their way out of a different situation before it all kind of feels the same. It was a bit more compelling in this episode because of the emotional reason behind their quest, but it still felt, kind of like deja vu after the last 3 seasons. Although I will say, with the turbo tank sequence on the bridge at the end of it, that was some spectacular action. That was something new and different that we hadn't seen in a long, long time. Let's start with the Bad Batch and their business, which is simply an extraction mission. Crosshair didn't know where Tantus is, but he thinks that former Vice Admiral Rampart might know how to find it, and of course they end up being able to capture him. Omega, in the meantime, is beginning to accept the consequences of her decision on Mount Tantus. Hemlock and Dr. Carr are already teasing that she's very special because of her high M count, and she finally gets to see the kids inside the vault. She also learned that Nala Se, which we guess is an eventual subplot in which the young clone will liberate the Kaminoan, and obviously the children too. So I'm waiting to see how this ties into the broader universe of Star Wars. I think that content that he was mentioning there in the midichlorian count and the experiments that are going on are all leading to a much bigger picture that, we saw some details in The Mandalorian with what Moff Gideon was trying to do in NN counts, but it's all leading into and filling in the blanks heading into the sequel trilogy. To that point, Screen Rant has an article up. Star Wars reveals the future of the Rise of Skywalker Sith planet Exegol. Made no secret, I love the Rise of Skywalker. I know it has its critics. I find that to be a popcorn crackling adventure, for lack of a better way to put it. And I enjoyed that movie thoroughly and find it infinitely rewatchable. And I love little details like this. Again, filling in the backstory with ancillary material. Rey's New Order movie, and we have some updates on that, is still a few years away, but the upcoming Star Wars book does shed light on Exegol's fate after the Rise of Skywalker. Archaeologists are apparently studying Palpatine and the Sith at Exegol. Star Wars has confirmed the archaeologists have begun to study Exegol in the aftermath of the Final Order's defeat in the Rise of Skywalker. The upcoming book, Star Wars: The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, will cover the Empire's full history, from its rise during the prequel era to its fall and attempted rebirth in the original and sequel eras, respectively. The Amazon UK listing features an excerpt from the book's second chapter, written from an all-in-universe perspective by Dominic Monaghan's character, Beaumont Kin. However, understandings of the past change. The details that have been retrieved from within the archives of both the Empire and the records of the First Order can, when combined with the new material being uncovered on Exegol, help tell a different story about the Clone Wars. The sentence implies that the First Order was fully defeated in the Rise of Skywalker and the heroes possessed their records. It also means there are no surviving Final Order forces on Exegol that pose a threat to the archaeologists studying the Sith ruins on the planet's surface. However, the Empire and the Sith returned after their defeat at the Battle of Endor, meaning they could be waiting for another chance to strike back. Even if they have been defeated, Beaumont Kin and his team face another challenge that has plagued many characters throughout the Star Wars franchise. So again, a little bit of backstory relating to the events of the Rise of Skywalker, and it's one of the things that I'm probably most excited about when it comes to this post the Rise of Skywalker film, is continuing to tell Star Wars tales in that sequel trilogy era. There's a big question mark on this movie, in my opinion, on how it's going to be, but as I was talking about with Civil War, I will certainly reserve judgment until we start seeing some trailers and further information about that movie.
This is not going to go the way you think.
From Empire Magazine, 1 year ago at Star Wars Celebration, the news was confirmed. Daisy Ridley would be officially coming back to a galaxy far, far away in the role of Rey in a film set 15-odd years after The Rise of Skywalker, in which her hero will be establishing a new Jedi Order. In the intervening 12 months, the project remained in its early stages, but Ridley herself has been awaiting her return to Star Wars, all while working on acclaimed smaller films like Sometimes I Think About Dying and The Woman in the Sea. Among it all, she's feeling positive about what her Star Wars future holds. She tells Empire in a major new career-spanning interview available in the upcoming issue covering the live-action series on Disney Plus, The Acolyte. This time, she's coming in a bit more eyes wide open to the whole experience. I suppose I feel more like I'm owning it. I suppose I owned it the first time. Basically, I'm an adult now, she explains. I certainly do not feel like an adult all the time. Obviously, personally, things have changed, and professionally, I've had a lot of other experiences. And so I definitely feel like it's a different thing this time. Even after 3 films and a considerable amount of online discourse, Ridley still holds a real affection for the world of Star Wars. There's just a lot of joy with me in these films, she says. Honestly, if I wasn't excited, I wouldn't have done it. And it feels like a great thing to be a part of. For now, she knows the story beats for the new film and what they will be, and at the time of the interview was preparing to read the script and feeling curious about it all. Whatever's in store, it will ultimately provide a strong basis for Ridley and Rey's return. It wasn't a difficult decision, she says. I didn't say yes right away, and Kathleen Kennedy was like, take as long as you need. Not that it took that long to say yes. Why wouldn't I do it? Yes, they've been divisive, but also they bring a lot of love and joy to a lot of people. It feels pretty amazing to be able to continue this character. Like, can I even remember how to play her? It's an interesting challenge as an actor to come back to something and try to figure out what's changed for me and what's changed for her, all in a day's work for the Jedi. So not a lot of meat on the bone there, just interesting as we await more Star Wars content and, see whether or not Disney can kind of point their ship back in a better direction. They're not doing very well in the court of public opinion through their own fault. So it'll be curious to see if they're able to put up on the big screen after so many years have gone by, which is still just amazing to me that you have a franchise as big as Star Wars and you have not released a film since 2019. We'll be going on some 6 years before a new Star Wars film comes out. It's just kind of unheard of.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, got a couple of emails this week to share from Ray 2017. I randomly started to binge watch all the trailers and TV spots for the Rise of Skywalker, and honestly, a part of me was feeling very nostalgic. I began to feel the same feelings I had before. It kind of goes back to my comments at the start of this week's show. Before I watched it in theaters, even though it turned out to be a different movie than I originally predicted, but I still love it. It had a simpleness to it that was very refreshing because the story was straightforward and was its own little love letter to all the movies that came before it, only to end up extending the olive branch for all the other content that we've been getting for 4 years even further. Therefore, it makes me want to see Rey's new movie that much more. I don't care if the sequel trilogy isn't the most perfect trilogy in the world, and it has its issues, all of them do. But I love it, and it's very special to me, and it helped me get through some of the most transitional times in my 20s and now in my early 30s. I'm beginning to love and appreciate it more now than I ever have. It only made me love this franchise even more, and I would not be possible if it weren't for all the sequels. They are all special, episodes 7, 8, and 9. Thank you, J.J. Abrams, Rian Johnson, and all the cast and crew for doing this trilogy. Let's get ready for Rey's movie now. Ben Fisher writes, I cannot help but think that parts of the story of Zana from the Legends books will get pulled into the Acolyte series. Her brother, Darovit, was a Jedi. In the second book, she sneaks into the Jedi archives with her, and her brother senses her. A group of Jedi track her and battle her and Darth Bane. It would be a great story. I would enjoy seeing it in live action. Ben Fisher. Thank you, Ben. You know, it's interesting. Just made me think of the look of the Star Wars Disney Plus shows. So we started watching Fallout on Amazon Plus. The series, post-apocalyptic series based on the video game. Very violent, very graphic, and somewhat quirky. Enjoyed the first 2 episodes, that's for sure, and we'll continue watching it. There's 8 episodes that all in the series. But what I pointed out almost immediately was how, for a live-action TV series, it looked like a movie, the way it was shot. I don't understand why the Disney Plus Star Wars shows look as crisp as they do when you can watch a series like Fallout or other series that we've watched. I think Peaky Blinders comes to mind as well. These series look very cinematic. Whereas if you watch, and this is a minor complaint, it's more of a personal preference on my part, but when you watch the Disney Plus series, you can tell that they're TV shows. The first season of The Mandalorian, and I've done a version of this commentary before, but the first season of The Mandalorian, especially that first episode, definitely has a more cinematic feel to it. As the series progressed, though, I feel like they started cutting costs relating to the production of the shows, which brought down some of that cinematic flair that we got from that first season of The Mandalorian. Looking at some of the still photographs from The Acolyte, it has that same sort of crisp television look. And I wonder if it is a cost-saving measure to shoot it that way. I would think that you could throw a filter on most anything that you're watching to give it more of a cinematic feel. And most people probably don't notice, but I do when I'm watching. It gives it, I don't want to say cheap, but you know you're watching a TV show. While we were watching Fallout, this could have been a film, even though it was a series. Now, that being said, when you look at how the production on series made for Apple Plus and for Amazon, it's a little unfair to go and compare that to other streaming services and their own personal IP. Because Apple and Amazon don't have to make money on their streaming. Apple has their Apple products. Amazon has Amazon. They can afford to lose money on their streaming platform because it brings more individuals in to purchase their other products. Other companies don't have that luxury when it comes to streaming. Disney does to a certain extent, but they've really taken a hit as of late. The majority of their money comes in from the parks, and they've certainly taken a hit on that front. But when you look at other streaming platforms that are struggling, whether it's Max or Paramount Plus, they can't really afford, and Peacock, they can't really afford to lose money on their streaming services. They don't have behemoth companies to back them up. All of that is to say Apple Plus, in terms of their production and the amount of money they spend on their shows, and Amazon, they're kind of in their own league, and they can spend whatever they want to make their shows look as good as they do. So that might be one reason why. But I was really struck when I was looking at those photographs from the Acolyte. I'm like, yeah, that looks like a TV show, and I just don't understand why it has to be that way. All right, listen, that wraps up the show for this week. Thank you so much for checking it out. Support my nerd world. Get a break from everything going on in the world, and there is a lot. Follow a ragtag squadron of pilots and one reluctant hero on a journey of survival as they fight for their future far from Earth. It's available to you in 7 books within the EMBARK series. Written for adults, but great for ages 11 plus. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with science fiction. Available on Kindle Unlimited if you subscribe. In ebook, also audiobook, hardcover, and paperback. With interstellar travel possible, pilot Taft Guardia prepared to travel to distant worlds. But when an apocalyptic industrial accident sparks a global evacuation, exploring the stars becomes a matter of survival. Meanwhile, a ruthless corporate madman with an armada of starships threatens every vessel not loyal to his regime. When a cryptic message from the past leads to what may be the only key to stopping him, it's up to Taft and his squadron to save Earth's evacuees before it's too late. Don't miss this fast-paced, action-packed, unusual mix of a post-apocalyptic adventure and an epic space opera saga. If you like your science fiction to be epic, as I mentioned, with some really cool technology, some romance, a lot of action, and devastation. Again, the first book in the series really is a combination of a post-apocalyptic thriller as the world meets its end that turns into an epic space opera. And again, with some romance in there. EMBARK is perfect for you. It's available on Amazon.com. Search for Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK. Or if you want to get there, you can go through mynerdworld.net and hit the links there on the homepage. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode. I look forward to hearing from you. Email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Give me your thoughts on what I talked about on this week's show, and I will talk to you again next week. I hope wherever you are happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you then. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.